Hi, Old Bull here. There's something real quiet about a man who knows exactly what matters to him. Not because he talks about it, but because you can feel it in how he moves, what he protects, and what he's willing to let go. But these days, that kind of man is getting rare. We've got too many boys in grown-up boots chasing every fire that burns loudest, while their own home smolders behind them. You see, most men don't fall because they're weak. They fall because they try to. Carry everything at once. They confuse being busy with being useful, and they mistake distractions for purpose. They'll work themselves into the ground fixing fences at work while their marriage rots. Or they'll chase money like it's salvation while their kids forget what their voice sounds like. And then they wonder where it all went wrong. But what? If I told you that your problem isn't the size of your to-do list, it's the order of it? That what's wrecking your peace isn't what you can't get done, but what you're doing instead of what matters? You don't need more time. You need clearer priorities. And today, we're going to talk about how real men strong. Grounded men figure out what to fix first. Because if everything is important, nothing is dot out here in the wilderness. When the wind's pushing hard against your back, and the sky don't promise you nothing but rain, you learn one thing fast. You can't do everything at once. And if you try, you'll burn out before you even get that first fence post in the ground. A real man, a strong man, knows how to stop, breathe deep, and ask himself, what needs doing first? That's what sets a provider apart from a wanderer. You may have a barn to fix, a pasture to clear, a roof to patch, but until you set your priorities, you're just spinning your wheels in the mud. When I first stepped onto this land, it was overwhelming. Trees down, fences sagging, horses hungry, and a house that felt more like a shell than a home. And I had Mama standing beside me with her eyes wide and her heart full of hope. That's when it hit me. The first job ain't to fix everything. It's to pick the one thing that matters most today and do it well. That's how a stoic man approaches life. He doesn't rush headlong into chaos. He walks into it like a cowboy with a purpose, boots firm in the mud, knowing that clarity comes before motion. I've seen men lose everything not because they lacked strength or tools, but because they lacked order. Their marriages, their health, their faith, all fell apart because they tried to fight 100 battles at once. That's not manhood, that's panic. Being a man means knowing your mission before mounting your horse. It means sitting by the fire with your notebook and listing what matters. Protecting your family, honoring your wife, sharpening your character. Just like a rancher checks his gear before a long ride, a real man checks his priorities before stepping out into the world. Let me tell you something I learned from building fence. If you don't walk the line first, see where it's weakest, where the thorns are, where the wires cut, you're going to waste hours chasing the wrong problem. Life's no different. Before you go trying to be a better husband, maybe you need to start with being a better listener. Before you try to teach your son discipline, maybe you need to get yours in check first. That's what real discipline is. The strength of character to look in the mirror before pointing a finger. That's where setting priorities begins. And here's the thing. Setting priorities doesn't mean sacrificing everything else. It just means putting the right things in the right order. You start with the middle pasture, not because it's perfect, but because it's possible. That's how a cowboy clears land, how a good man rebuilds trust, how a tired father earns back his family's respect, one fence at a time, not all at once, not in a rush, just steady, clear, determined. And when the first job's done, you move on to the next with confidence, not chaos. And that's where we head next. I've seen it happen to good men, the kind with calloused hands and honest hearts, staring at a list of things to fix, mend, or rebuild, and not knowing where to start. They end up doing what too many of us do when we feel buried. Nothing. We sit down in the barn, stare at the broken gate, the unfinished house, the distance growing in our marriage, and we say, I'll deal with it tomorrow. But tomorrow becomes next week, and next week becomes never. That's not because we're lazy. It's because we're overwhelmed. And overwhelm is a silent killer of purpose. There's a kind of fear that doesn't come with loud panic. It's quiet. It sneaks in through the back door of your mind when you're tired, worn out, and stretched too thin. It says, there's too much. Don't even try. And before you know it, you're not fixing anything. You're hiding in the workshop, scrolling your phone, smoking cigars you didn't earn. The fight inside a man doesn't always look like anger. Sometimes it looks like stillness. And not the good kind. The kind that eats away at your identity because you've forgotten how to move. But here's the trick. I learned one I want to pass on to you. When everything feels like it needs fixing, pick one thing. Just one. Don't overthink it. Don't make it perfect. Just find a small win and make it yours. That's how a good man keeps going. You don't clear the whole field in a day, but you can chop one briar, drive one post, or take your wife's hand and say, let's try again. And that one act of movement, that one step forward, it starts something inside you that paralyzing fear can't stop. You want to know how I got through the hardest seasons of my life. I didn't make grand plans. I didn't write out a 5-year strategy. I put on my boots, grabbed the axe, and cleared 10 feet of fence line. That was it. Then the next day, 10 more. Sometimes, progress isn't about discipline or motivation. It's about momentum. That first act of defiance against paralysis. That's where strength of character begins. That's what separates the man who stays stuck from the man who starts over. Because in the end, paralysis doesn't come from having too much to do. It comes from believing you have to do it all right now. But you don't. What you need is courage. Quiet strength to start where you are with what you have, even if it's just a pair of loppers and a prayer. Don't wait for the whole plan to come together. Start where your feet are planted. And once you take that first step, well, then it's time to talk about what comes next. You don't fix a barn roof during a thunderstorm. You wait for the storm to pass. But you sure as hell can patch up the floor while it's raining. That's how I see life when it piles up around us like logs in a swollen river. Folks get frozen because they're staring at the biggest mess first, when all they need is to take one step. The strongest men I've ever known weren't the ones who moved mountains, but the ones who moved the first rock. They didn't wait for the sun to come out or for perfect conditions. They grabbed what tools they had, rolled up their sleeves, and got to work. Even if all they had was a pair of loppers and a handful of grit dot now, let me tell you something plain and simple. The day you stop waiting for ideal conditions is the day you start building the life you are meant to live. You might not have the money to fix the whole place, but you've got time to mend a broken hinge. You may not be able to heal your entire relationship tonight, But you sure as hell can start with one honest conversation. That's manhood. That's responsibility. That's what separates the real men from the dreamers. When you look around and everything feels too big, that's the sign it's time to act small. Because small actions done today always outpace big intentions left for tomorrow. I remember one winter, we had a tree that snapped clean through the middle of the main fence line. Snow was up to my knees, and my back was already sore from hauling firewood the night before. I didn't have the chainsaw sharpened, didn't have new posts, didn't even have the time. But I had an axe, so I cut, slowly, one swing at a time. And I cleared that fence enough to get the horses back in. Later, when spring came, we finished it properly. But that day, that little bit of work mattered. You see, good men don't wait for comfort. They move with whatever they've got. That it ain't just about chores or fences. It's about showing up to your marriage, even when your heart's tired. It's about talking to your son, even when you don't know what to say. It's about pulling yourself out of bed when the weight of the world says, stay down. When life's in disarray, we don't need heroes, we need workers. And there's no shame in starting where you are, with what you've got. That's what makes a strong man, a man who acts, not a man who fantasizes about acting. And the beauty is, once you start clearing one little patch, the fog begins to lift. It's easier to see the next step. You begin to feel the strength of progress, a quiet strength, built not on speed or spectacle, but on resolve. That's when something inside shifts. Because when a man proves to himself he can act now, he'll be ready for what comes next, even when it comes dressed as his silence and smallness. That funny thing about small steps is they don't just clear fences or fix roof. They heal hearts too. A lot of men think they need some grand gesture to make things right with their partner. Big speech, big jip, big gift. But I'll tell you straight, it's the small things done with quiet intention that rebuild what life's storms have torn down. A hand on her back while she cooks. A thank you whispered instead of expected. A cup of coffee poured without being asked. These aren't acts of weakness. They're signs of presence, of maturity, of manhood. The kind that doesn't need applause. You see, when two people drift apart, it's rarely all at once. It's a slow leak, words not said, glances missed, touches withheld. And the way back? It's the same. Quiet, deliberate drops of effort that start to fill the gap again. I once knew a cowboy, hard as nails, who hadn't spoken to his wife with warmth in months. One day he just started bringing her a flower from the trail every morning. Nothing fancy. Sometimes just a wild daisy. And over time, her eyes started lighting up again when he walked in. That wasn't about flowers. That was about effort. Rebuilding trust isn't about being perfect. It's about being consistent. It's about showing up, not just physically, but emotionally. You can be in the same room and still be miles apart. But when you remember how she likes her tea, or you compliment her laugh, even when your day's been heavy, that's when the ground starts to shift. You're not fixing everything in one day. You're just proving one gesture at a time that you still give a damn. And that matters. More than you realize, that sometimes we confuse strength with silence. But real strength, quiet strength, knows when to speak, knows when to soften, knows when to reach across that invisible gap and say, I still see you. And maybe you don't say it with words. Maybe you say it with a clean sink. Or by sitting beside her on the porch, watching the same stars you used to dream under. Being a strong man isn't about winning arguments. It's about creating peace, especially in the small spaces where love used to live. Because in the end, a relationship isn't rebuilt with a wrecking ball. It's mended with thread. And the thread is made up of everyday moments that say, I choose you again. One knot at a time, one choice at a time. One small gesture that tells the story loud enough for a heart to hear, even when the world outside is too loud to listen. The hardest thing about fixing what's broken isn't the labor, it's figuring out where to start digging. And most folks, they grab a hammer for what needs a shovel. They paint over the rot, patch the leak without checking the pipes. I've seen marriages where the couple fights about dinner, about laundry, about money. But those ain't the real battles. Those are just smoke signals. The fire's coming from somewhere deeper, somewhere older. And if you don't trace the smoke back to the flame, you'll be chasing symptoms till you're both too tired to care. I remember a man who came to me years ago, said his wife didn't respect him anymore. He wanted to fix her attitude, asked me what to say to make her listen. I asked him one thing. When was the last time you gave her a reason to admire you? He stared at the ground like the answer might be hiding in his boots. The truth is, her attitude wasn't the root. His passivity was. His lack of purpose, of presence. And he was trying to solve the storm by yelling at the wind. That never works, brother. We do that a lot as men. We try to adjust what's visible instead of dealing with what's vulnerable. Like cutting down weeds every week, but never pulling up the root. Eventually, they come back stronger, meaner, deeper. You want a good marriage? Stop arguing about toothpaste and start asking why neither of you feel heard. You want your kids to obey? Start looking at what kind of example you're setting. When you think they're not watching, every surface crack points to a deeper fracture. Ignore it, and one day the whole wall falls. It takes humility to admit you've been fixing the wrong thing. It takes courage to stop blaming the world for your unrest and start asking what in you needs healing. That's what manhood is. Not brute force, but honest reflection. A kind of strength that can sit with the question, what am I afraid to face? You find that answer, and you've found the root. You face it, and you've started real change. You ignore it, and you'll keep repeating cycles till your life feels like a broken record nobody wants to hear. Because it's not the storm that sinks the ship. It's the leak you never patched because it felt too small to matter. And once you see that clearly, once you stop playing whack-a-mole with problems that aren't really the problem, then you can pick up the right tools. Not to mask the pain, but to heal it. And from there, you'll start seeing just how much of life you were trying to fix from the surface. When the roots were the ones begging for your attention, some wounds don't bleed, they just linger. Quiet, stubborn, always aching when the weather shifts. And just like a rusted fence or an overgrown pasture, the damage we let sit too long won't be fixed in a single afternoon. I've met men who expect to heal their marriage in a weekend. Retreat or their broken spirit with a 3-step video. But that's not how real restoration works. Not in relationships, not in manhood, not in the human heart. Real change takes time. It takes patience. And patience these days is a vanishing virtue. See, when you're dealing with something that's been worn down by years of neglect, emotional or physical, you need a long view. like a rancher who knows the land won't bounce back overnight. He sets a plan, clears a little each week, fences one section at a time. He doesn't rush it, and he doesn't get discouraged when the work feels endless, because he sees what it'll be if he just keeps showing up. And that's the mindset we need when trying to rebuild trust, character, or any kind of lasting bond. I've had students come here to the school thinking they'd fix their life in a 5-day course. I can teach you how to saddle a horse, build a fire, handle a rope, but no one can rush your growth, not even you. What matters is showing up every day, even when you don't feel like it, especially when you don't feel like it. Healing is like clearing brush. It seems like nothing's changing until you look back and realize you've opened a whole path you couldn't see before. And you know what? That kind of slow progress builds a quiet strength. The kind that doesn't need to boast, doesn't need to post. Just keeps going, keeps building. That's the heart of a strong man, a good man, one who understands that legacy isn't built in loud moments, it's built in steady ones. In the mornings, you keep trying. In the nights, you don't give up. In the little repairs that, over time, make a broken thing whole again. You've got to see the end from the beginning. Not because it'll come quickly, but because that vision keeps your hands moving when your hope is tired. And every small act of discipline, every moment of integrity, becomes a brick in the foundation of something that lasts. But even then, you'll need more than patience. You'll need someone willing to walk with you. Because long roads are easier when you're not the only one clearing the brush out. It's funny how much faster a job moves when you've got someone beside you. I remember patching a long stretch of fence last spring. Alone, it felt like the wire rolled out slower, the posts weighed more, and the sun was hotter. But when Mama showed up with a second pair of gloves and a quiet smile, everything changed. We didn't talk much, just handed each other tools, took turns with the post driver, and moved forward. That's the kind of rhythm that makes hard things feel a little lighter. I've seen the same thing in relationships. A man trying to fix things on his own can feel like he's rowing a boat against the current. But when both people pick up an oar and pull in sync, no matter how small the strokes, the boat starts to move. It ain't about power. It's about alignment. And when you're aligned, even the heavy stuff starts to shift. Progress multiplies, not just doubles, because the effort begins to feed on shared purpose. Sometimes, the hardest part is asking for help, especially for men who were raised to carry everything on their shoulders in silence. But there's strength in saying, "Can you help me with this?" Whether it's a chore, a project, or healing old wounds. And when that help shows up, not to take over, but to stand beside, you realize how much more you're capable of when the load is shared. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. And let me say this to the married fellas listening. Your wife ain't your employee. She's your partner. When you treat her like someone building something with you, not just living next to you, things start to change. You work on the yard while she handles dinner, and then you swap the next day. You fix the faucet, and she pays the bills. You both hold the line in your own way. That's not just teamwork, that's love with boots on. The progress you make together won't always be fast or flashy, but it'll be real. And every fence post you set side by side becomes a memory, a mark of commitment, a story you'll one day tell with a smile. Because what really matters isn't how much you did, it's how much you built together. And when that bond starts to grow roots, you'll begin to notice something else beneath the surface too. It's the little things, always the little things, that tell the truth about a man's heart. You can say, "I love you," 100 times, but if you can't take a moment to rinse your coffee cup or fold a blanket she left on the couch, your actions speak louder. Real manhood isn't proven in grand speeches or dramatic declarations. It's in whether or not you close the cabinet doors she hates seeing open. Whether or not you put your boots by the door instead of trekking mud across the floor she just mopped. C. Respect is subtle. It doesn't always arrive with flowers or jewelry. Sometimes it shows up as silence when she's tired. Sometimes it's listening without interrupting. Sometimes it's noticing her hands are full and picking up the slack without being asked. These aren't chores, they're declarations. Each one says, "I see you. I value you. I'm paying attention." And that right there, that's the quiet strength of a good man. Same goes for your sons and daughters. When your child shows you a drawing and you actually look at it instead of just nodding, that's respect. When you show up to a recital or tuck them in with a story even though you're dead tired from work, that's love in motion. You don't have to be loud. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be present. Because the strongest men are the ones who understand the power of the small dot now. For those of us who feel like it's too late, like the little things got buried under years of forgetting, let me tell you something. It's never too late to start paying attention again. One kind word can soften years of silence. One unexpected gesture like warming up her truck on a cold morning, or fixing something she's asked about 3 times can speak louder than 1,000 empty apologies. It just takes humility. And intention. These small acts are the bricks that rebuild broken bridges. You don't have to come back with a big emotional speech. You just have to come back with action. Not all at once. Just one brick at a time. And before you know it, that cold distance starts to thaw. Because when someone feels seen, even in the smallest way, they start to believe in the warmth again. And that warmth tends to light the path towards something even deeper. Once the warmth starts creeping back in, the next step is to ask yourself, what have I been doing every day that keeps us apart instead of bringing us together? Because most of the time, it ain't a big betrayal that drives people apart. It's the daily grind. It's habits that form without thought. You get so wrapped up in surviving, in just pushing through the day, that you don't even notice your routines have turned you into roommates instead of partners. And man, that's a cold kind of distance. I've always said, routine can be your best friend or your worst enemy. When life gets heavy, we default to patterns that keep us from sinking. But sometimes, those same patterns are what keep us disconnected. So maybe it's time to sit down with your spouse, your child, or whoever you've been drifting from, and talk through the daily rhythm. Who's carrying what weight? Who's feeling burned out? Who's been walking alone while pretending not to be tired? You'd be surprised how many good men and women are quietly drowning in silence. Change doesn't have to be radical. Sometimes it's just swapping out an hour of TV at night for a walk around the block together, or making a habit of eating breakfast at the same table, even if it's just toast and silence. Maybe it's agreeing that Saturdays are for projects done side by side. It's not about adding more to your plate. It's about rearranging what's already there so that it serves your relationships, not just your schedule. And listen, for the stubborn ones out there, I know routines feel safe. You built them. for a reason. But if that routine is built on avoidance, stress, or autopilot, then it's not serving anyone. Your wife doesn't want you to be Superman. Your kids don't want a perfect father. They want you. They want you tired, with dirt, under your nails and stories to tell. They want you real. And you can't be real with people if your entire day is designed to keep you emotionally unavailable. The truth is, reconnection starts with intention. You take a hard look at your days and ask, where can I make space? Because if we don't make space for those we love, life will make space without them. And when that happens, we start living alone under the same roof. But if you dare to adjust even a few rhythms, just enough to let them back in, you'll start to feel it again. That quiet hum of partnership, the rhythm of brotherhood, of family, of being a man who shows up in the simple, daily ways that truly count. You see, once we start to adjust our rhythms, it becomes painfully clear that some of what's been keeping us from each other isn't just routine, it's emotional clutter. Things unsaid, resentments quietly packed away like firewood you hoped you'd never have to burn. And this is where most men falter, not because they're unwilling to work, but because they've never been taught how to work on this. How to deal with the mess inside that keeps them stuck on the outside. Now I've spent a lot of time around men who carry real weight providers, husbands, protectors. But some of the heaviest loads I've seen aren't in their arms, they're in their eyes. You can tell a man is tired, not just by his boots, but by how often he avoids looking people in the eye. That's emotional fog. You want to move forward, but you're not even sure what direction is clear anymore. That's why emotional clarity matters. It's the compass in your chest that tells you where the blockage really is. Sometimes what blocks a man's progress is something simple, but powerful. A fear he never admitted, a wound he never let close, a grudge he keeps feeding out of pride. I've held all three in my life, and I can tell you, they're like saplings growing along the fence line. Small at first, easy to ignore, but leave them long enough, and they'll twist the whole structure until nothing stands right. And no amount of wire or wood will fix a fence if you don't first cut away what's choking it. So how do you clear it out? You stop pretending. You find a quiet place. Maybe it's your truck cab after a long shift. Maybe it's beside the firewood pile out back. And you sit with yourself long enough to be honest, not productive, not efficient, just honest. What are you really afraid of losing? What guilt are you dragging around like a broken saddle? What are you still angry about that you never admitted out loud? Write it down. Speak it into the air. Do whatever it takes to name it, because once it has a name, you can face it like a man. And here's the part most don't want to hear. Emotional clarity ain't a one-time thing. It's a habit, a discipline, like checking your gear before a long ride or cleaning your rifle, even if you haven't fired a shot. You don't wait for something to break. You stay sharp, because when your heart's in order, your life follows. And only then can you build something real, whether it's a marriage, a home, or a legacy that lasts beyond your own boots in the dirt. So now that we've walked through all this, one step at a time, I've got a question for you. What's the first thing you're going to clear out of your own fence line? What thorny excuse have you been letting grow wild between you and the life you say you want? Maybe it's neglect. Maybe it's pride. Maybe it's just plain fear. But whatever it is, it's time to stop walking past it like it'll fix itself. Truth is, this ain't about fixing everything overnight. It's about deciding what matters, and starting there. You don't need to rebuild the whole ranch today, but you sure as hell better pick up the loppers and make that first cut, because time's gonna pass either way in whether you use it to grow or decay. That's on you, Dot. So let me ask you, man to man, what do you need to clear out to finally move forward? What fence have you been avoiding because it looks too tangled to touch? Drop a comment and tell me. Let's start the kind of conversation that leads to real change. And if this spoke to you, even just a little, if it made you stop and think, then do yourself a favor. Subscribe to the channel, turn on those notifications, and stick around. Because here at Old Bull's Wisdom, we don't just talk. We rebuild what matters.